open and exposed as when you're on Tudong. But still the opportunity to have no group schedule at all, have no times when you're set where you have to do this or have to do that. It's really good. It puts you on it kind of throws you back on your own resources. But as I said, the one time I was going to go on Tudong, my teacher got sick and I couldn't go. I had to stay and look after him. So I have no great stories to tell. I mean, living in the monastery there, we had lots of encounters with cobras, and those were always good for mindfulness. Because one of the first things one of the most valuable things I learned about cobras was that, like all snakes, they don't see you if you don't move. So if you see a snake, just stop, and they won't detect you. So if you're sitting and meditating, it's perfect. They'll just go right past, and as if you're a warm rock, But I did have to learn how to overcome I grew up on Long Island where they don't have snakes. And so it was just kind of creepy to have these things around all over the place. And when I first got there, it seemed like they were all over the place. I'd tell Ajaan Geoff, I'd be doing walking meditation. There was a cobra lying right next to my path. Or I'd be going down to the bathroom, and all of a sudden this snake would go between my legs. And the first couple of times he said, yeah, it's kind of normal. We have lots of snakes here. But then it was every day. And after all, he said, this is not normal. He says, they're kind of check out this strange monk. And so he gave me a chant. It's one of the chants that, I don't know if it's in your chanting book. Spreading goodwill to snakes. And that kind of took care of the problem. But then it ultimately became my job. I had to catch the snakes that got into the kitchen. They'd get in and my way of catching it was, say you've got a cobra in the kitchen, and as soon as you're there, the cobra will start getting as close as possible to the wall. And so I would put a pail kind of in its direction, and then they had this little reed, which was about this big around, and it grew out of a bulb, and it would come out of the bottom of the bulb and then curl its way up and go straight up. And so if you peeled it off, you had a little hook. And so I would take this and I'd sort of hit the floor behind the cobra, and that would get the cobra moving toward the pail. And then finally, it was funny, there was always that little gap between the wall and the pail where it would never do that. It would always go into the pail. And so then I'd just pick up the pail with a stick, and then sort of swing the pail back and forth as it went out, and it would put it in the grass, and then it would go off into the grass. And so after a while I wasn't that afraid of them. You had to be careful around them. The bathrooms over there, I don't know if you've ever been there, but there's just basically a room. It's like a shower stall with a toilet and a little hole off in the wall where the water goes out. And anything can come in and out of that hole, if it's small enough. And I always checked before I would go in to see if anything had crawled in. And there was one day, however, when I was really in a hurry to go to the bathroom. And so I go in and I stepped on something soft. So I immediately pulled back, and sure enough, it was a cobra. But fortunately, though, it had a toad in its mouth. And so it spit out the toad, and then to turn on me, by that time I was long gone. So the toad and I saved each other's lives. There was another monk at the monastery, though he was more imaginative in his ways of catching snakes. He had a tattoo on his shin that he was convinced that this prevented anything bigger than an insect from biting him. And so one time he did the number one thing you're never supposed to do with a snake. He caught the snake by the tail. But what happened was there was a cat that had given birth to kittens in a box in the kitchen. And the snake was coming in to get the kittens. And the cat was kind of, trying to scare off the snake. And so the snake was watching the cat and didn't see Tunde, the monk, come up behind him and jerk his tail like this. And he must have dislocated something, because he took it and swung it around. And then by the time he was done, he had this very limp snake. And so he took it out in the grass, and the snake kind of readjusted its spine and went off. And there was another time when there was another kind of snake that was in the nun's room, and it was in the corner, and And he said this snake tends to be quite shy, but you get too close and it'll bite. And so what we did was we sort of took a PVC pipe and pointed it at the corner, and then there were three of us, and then all at a signal we all jumped at the snake, and the snake went into the PVC pipe. And then we had a snake in a pipe. And so we picked it up and said, okay, where do you want the snake? And so we wanted it out in the grass, and so we went out, boom, and the snake went out. So even just being in the monastery, you had to be alert all the time.
Last time I was at Wat Metta, I was walking along just a path, and I was greeted by a fairly sizable rattlesnake.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you get quite often.
Mm-hmm. It's right. The sizable ones are less scary than the little ones, because the little ones don't know their strength. In other words, when a little rattler bites you, it will put all of its venom into you, whereas the older ones know enough. So just to put a little bit. So you have to watch out for the little ones. But the strangest snake story I had was one time the snake got in a hut. It was hut where a couple had been staying. The husband was in one room and the wife was in another one. And they were going to be leaving. And so she went up to gather the stuff, and she came running down and said there was a snake in the hut. And it was what they call a ngugabat in Thai, which looks kind of like, it has the coloring of a hummingbird. A red throat and a green back. And it's a kind of snake that if it bites you, it won't kill you, but the wound will take a long time to heal. And so I went up to check it, and sure enough, as I walked into the room, the snake went into this rolled-up mat. So I kind of unfurled the mat, and the snake comes out. And then I took one of those very soft brooms, and I brushed it out of the room, down on the porch, down the steps. And then when it hit the ground, it went up like this, and just lay there. And I said, wait a minute, I didn't consciously hurt the snake. I didn't think I'd done anything that would damage it or injure it. And I was wondering, well, maybe it's playing dead. And so I said, I'll come back in about an hour. And if it's still lying there, okay, it's dead. And if it's gone, then it was just playing dead. And I came back in an hour, and the bones were left, but nothing else. It was in the same position where I'd left it. And to this day, I have no explanation for what happened. Some people suggested it was a voodoo snake. Because that's the other aspect of being in the forest over in town. There's a very strong sense that strange things happen in the forest. We actually did have a voodoo attack one time. This group of people came from a town on the other side of the province which was renowned for its voodoo practitioners. And apparently they saw that the jetty that we had at the top of the hill, in those big spired monuments, was kind of a power spot. And they wanted to use that. Well, they didn't tell us that, but they came one evening. And what was strange about it was they arrived just after dark, and John Fuang had me go out and check and see who would come. And as I opened the door, they were coming up the stairs. And as I opened up the door, the woman at the front of the group fell back on the people behind her. I said, this doesn't look good. And so they came in and they said they wanted to spend a couple of days up in the jetty, and John Fuang made them take the 8 precepts, which he never did usually. You just have to say, go and observe the 8 precepts on your own. But he said, I want you to take the 8 precepts with me. The thing is, when you're on the 8 precepts, you can't do voodoo. And so they're very frustrated. And so after they left, we started having these weird things happening at the monastery. The weirdest were these centipedes. Now, centipedes in Thailand are not the little centipedes we have here. They're about this big. And they have a nasty bite. But they're all over the place. And what was strange about these was if you took some chanting water and you sprinkled on them, they would just die. So obviously they weren't real centipedes. And I ran into one night. I was going to wash John Fuang's robe, and there was a big tuft of grass there, and there was one of these centipedes in there, and I looked at it, and it didn't have a head, but it was running around. And so we took it up and had a layperson sprinkle some of the chanting water on it, and it died. So it was weird. So, which John Fuang would use and say, it's okay, if there are things like this in the world, and he said that's another good reason why you should meditate, is because meditation protects you from that. Question? Mm-hmm.
I'm a therapist, and I have a lot of clients who are dreaming of the world ending and being taken over by something else. Different things, spiders, ants, aliens. And I attribute, most of everybody is pretty high stress and disturbed. Fear of nuclear holocaust, fear of civil war, many things. And I have a practice. I just wonder what's your first thought on that?
My first thought on that is, you know the story about King Basenadi coming to see the Buddha in the middle of the day? It's the middle of the day, comes, pays respect to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, where are you coming from in the middle of the day? And the king, in a remarkably frank response, says, the typical things a person mad about power has been doing. And the Buddha says, suppose that a trustworthy man would come from the east and say there's this enormous mountain moving in from the east, crushing all living beings in its path. Another trustworthy man came from the south, similarly a mountain moving in from the south, and turns out another mountain's coming in from the west and another from the north. And say, considering that here's this terrible destruction of life, and the human life is so hard to come by, what would you do? And King Basenadi said, what else can I do to calm my mind and practice the Dharma? And the Buddha said, well, I tell you, the aging, illness, and death are moving in, crushing all living beings in their wake. What are you going to do? Calm your mind and practice the Dharma. That's the basic message of heedfulness all the time, which is that we have no idea. It could very well happen. Something really bad could happen. I was in the doctor's office the other day, and I don't know what the doctor was thinking, but he put magazines in the office, and I had a long wait. And so I pulled down one of the magazines. It was a natural history magazine on a special issue devoted to plagues. And you read about all these plagues that have gone through the human race, in recorded history, some that I had never heard of before, and some that for which they still have no explanation what the disease was. And you realize that human life is pretty precarious. And so, for your clients, you just got to do something saying, look, there's something that's more valuable than just being alive. It's in making good use out of your life, and with whatever time you have. So, but that's how I deal with it.
And could you speak about your thoughts about afterlife and death and what happens?
Well, you go on to, what happens, I almost died one time. I was electrocuted. And the experience was taught me a lot about one of the things that happens as you die is your mind starts racing really fast. It was, I was electrocuted basically just for a couple of seconds before the current was broken. For me, it felt like 5 minutes. I suddenly realized I can't stay in this body anymore. And then and these things start appearing to you. It's like these doors that are sort of alternatives. And some of the thoughts had to do with, here I was only 35 at the time, and I said, my father's going to be really upset. And so I can't think about that. I just can't, I've been practicing all this time. I've got to keep my mind under control. So various thoughts would come out and say, nope, 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 nope. And then the current stopped. But you can see your mind is looking for some other place to go, and you tend to go with what the alternatives that are presented to you have to do with your past karma. But if you have good karma, you have another number of alternatives to choose from. You have to be careful about where you go at that time. Or you will have the choice.
Do you have thoughts on once you're through a door?
Once you're through a door, depends on the door you choose. But choose carefully. I say, okay, I want to go to a place where I can continue to practice. Ajaan Geoff once made the comment one time, he says, if you have the choice between being a deva next time and being a human being, go for deva. Because the human realm is going to be pretty bad for a while. So, yeah.
How long do you have to make? How long do you have to make this?
Well, it depends on how quickly you're pushed out of your body. But again, as I said, your mind races. For me, it felt like 5 minutes, and it just was like that. Because your mind is really trying to find some alternative. You realize, I can't stay here. And these alternatives come up as to where you could go. You got a question?
In a lot of the scriptures, it talks about caring for mother and family, or caring for your parents, and what a blessing that is. But that involves a lot of attachment and then suffering when they die. So, do you have some words about dealing with the suffering that inevitably accompanies the caring?
Okay, you have to realize that we have a limited amount of time with one another, and just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, have no idea how much it's going to be. There's some cases where people have really bad relationships with their parents, and the Buddha doesn't say you have to love them, but you look after them. As for the sense of attachment, it's hard to care for somebody and not have some sense of attachment, but you have to keep reminding yourself that death and separation are normal, and kind of keep preparing yourself ahead of time that I've got this just amount of time. I have no long idea how long it's going to be, but I do have right now. Try to make right now a good place. Because one of the hardest things is if after the parent has passed, you realize, there are things I could have done that I didn't do, or things that I regret having done. And that actually hurts more than the loss. So just kind of be very careful about what you say and how whatever you're thinking of. Ask yourself, what do I want to have said to my parents before they go? In a good sense. And say those things, So you're not left with the regret that right? Yes.
I was kind of trapped in, I was experiencing a lot of worry, restlessness in the meditation. A little bit that was worry, and then when I came out, it was still there, and I recognized it as a hindrance, and yet I applied what I knew to apply. That it's like this right now, and that's what this is, and it's this is what worry feels like, and I just stayed stuck for a while, and it eventually, of course, went away like it all does, right?
Well, you want to get it to go away faster. Yeah. And one of the things you can ask yourself is, why do I feel compelled to worry about this? What do I think is going to be accomplished by worrying? And then you can remind yourself, I don't really know if this thing is going to happen that I'm worried about, but I do know that whatever happens, I will need more mindfulness and I will need more alertness. So if I go back to the breath and develop those qualities, I'm not being irresponsible, because there's part of the mind that tells you, you've got to worry about this thing, and if you don't, you're being irresponsible. And you say, wait a minute, I don't know if that's going to happen, but I do know that whatever comes up, unexpected things will happen, and the best way to prepare for that is to be very mindful, very alert, and develop your discernment. So the way you do that is go back to your breath. Sort of argue with the voices. And this is where it's good to think of the mind as kind of like a committee. You've got lots of committee members in there. And some of the worst ones are the taskmasters that say, you have this responsibility, you've got to do this. And some of them are reasonable and some of them not. Yes?
What would you say to a person who's come to the Dhamma later in life, and there's a lot of karmic stuff, I call it karmic wreckage. And then now at an older age, coming to realize and understand this teaching, what would you say to that person?
Okay, well, it's better than not recognizing the wreckage and having to just live with it. I mean, you're being given tools for how to deal with it. Then one see that it's just kind of this is karma, and the karma there's a lot of back and forth in karma. So you're asking, who was at fault in this situation? And you say, well, it's probably gone back and forth for a long time. And so try to have goodwill for everybody involved. And so the resentments about so and so did this to me, or I did this to so and so. Just have lots of goodwill. And say, it's at least as good that I'm able to learn how to step out of that. And not just, because otherwise we just get pulled back in. So, And my teacher had a student who came to meditation when she was 65. And she had lived an interesting life. Her husband had died when the kids were young, and so she had to set up a business on her own. And she was quite something. She was in the town of Radbori, which has a mafia. And so sure enough, the mafia chieftain came into her. She opened a movie theater. And so the mafia chieftain came in with his people one day, and everybody in the movie theater just scattered. And she knew that, well, he's coming for protection money. And so she went down and she sat right next to him. And she said she didn't look at him. She kept looking at the screen. And she says, this is a place for people to come and enjoy themselves and relax. And if you're here to enjoy yourself and relax, you're welcome to come. But if you're coming for other reasons, please go. And he left. But she had a lot of stuff from the past as well. I mean, in her case, it was almost physical. I mean, she'd meditate, she'd just start throwing up. And then it took a while to sort of get that out of her system. But there's kind of a cleaning up that comes with the meditation, and you can think of, so whatever you're suffering right now, as you remember what things happen, think, well, at least I'm cleaning this out. I'm doing some good housework before it's too late. She ended up, turns out in later years she had cancer. And she went to the hospital, they opened her up and discovered it was way too far gone to do anything about it for her. And so they sewed her back up again and said, do you want some pain medication? She said, no, I'd rather go alert. And it got so that the doctors and nurses would come into her room every day for a little Dharma talk in the morning. And that's how she died. But it was, and she was very determined and had developed good, strong powers of concentration. Yes.
Could you talk about just developing those powers of concentration?
That's going to be tomorrow's topic. But we're going to do about, if you want a preview. The important thing about concentration is find something you like as an object. And I found that the breath is very useful in a lot of ways because you can manipulate the breath to make it work with the energies in the body. It gives you something to do, so you're not just there, in, out, but you're thinking about where is it going, what parts of the body you may have chronic illnesses in. Can you think of the energy going through there and kind of cleaning things out? In other words, not only is it comfortable, but also interesting to kind of get in touch with your body and the energies, and then learn how to go through the day being sensitive to those things. And that way you kind of develop a momentum as you work with that. Because I've been working with the breath now for 40-some years, and I still learn new things about it. So there's always something new to learn. So no, you don't have to come tomorrow now. Yes.
Can you talk pitfalls of having a meditative practice, but not fully taking refuge in the Buddha or the sangha, but just the Dhamma?
Well, a large part of what you're going to be learning as a meditator is not just the technique, but it's also kind of personal values. And this is what it kind of exemplified in the example of the Buddha and the example of the sangha. And these are people who've actually followed this path. Because all too often it's very easy to read the texts and say, well, I understand the texts on a conceptual level. But then to see how they actually apply in real practice, sometimes there's unexpected twists. And being open to learn from the example of other people, and also open to learn from criticism from other people, is an important part. I mean, I know a lot of people who can read the texts, and they're very smart in the texts, but they're very closed to the idea of that they have to learn something from anybody else. And I don't want to be, what's the word, generationist, but people who grow up with computers tend to be less willing to learn from other people because they know from the computer. So that's something you have to watch out for. I mean, I've probably created enough monsters through access to insight.
Follow-up question. So what would you recommend meditators who are very attached to just the Dhamma, assuming that?
Well, remember, where does the Dharma come from? It came from people. And it's simply an expression of how they talk about general principles, but then there's a term that the Buddha would often pair with the word Dharma. And in Thailand you hear it paired as much as well. You don't hear it so much here in America. The word is atta, A-T-T-H-A. We're not talking about self. It's atta, which means basically both the meaning and the purpose of the Dharma. And that's something you've got to learn by being around other people who've practiced it. You're not going to know the meaning, really know the meaning of it until you've seen, oh, this is what this means as it's carried out in practice. But look for good people.
So how often in the Pali Canon are there instances where the Buddha taught just householders?
There are lots. There are actually lots.
Without the context of being in a monastic discipline.
There are lots of places where he teaches householders. Largely, issues about running your household, the things that make for a good marriage, things that make for a stable family.
But specifically about meditation.
About meditation.
Yeah.
There are a couple passages where he talks about that. Meditation. With contemplation of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, your generosity, your virtue, your the qualities that would make you a deva. Those are topics he specifically teaches to lay people. I'm trying to think about others. I mean, there are cases in the Tarigata and Tarigata where they talk about how the Buddha would teach fairly abstract topics to lay people. But they don't go into much detail. They just said, the Buddha taught me about the aggregates, or the Buddha taught me about this or that other topic.
What were the circumstances in which he taught these very high level?
We probably saw that these people were ready for high level teachings. But they didn't memorize things to the extent of, this is what so and so was like before she came to the Dharma. But that doesn't mean you can't take what's there. Mm-hmm. Yes?
So one of the things that I've been really looking at in my practice, or maybe I'm of necessity being bodied by it as becoming. And I just found out you wrote a whole book on that. And I'm hoping to find it. And I wonder if you might say a little bit about just, in meditation, just a lot of future tripping.
Future tripping, okay. Well, the whole process of becoming basically means that you take on an identity in a particular world of experience. And you can do this in your mind. A thought appears and you just go into that thought and you become the person doing things in that thought. The important thing to remember, and it also can mean this becoming now. You are a human being. You have become a human being. And this is your identity in the human world for right now. And the two processes are very intimately connected. We were talking earlier about when a person dies, it's like a thought appears in the mind and you go into it and it actually becomes a new world in which you take on birth. So you've got to be very careful about which places you go. I mean, all too often we're like someone standing at the side of the road, someone comes, drives you up and says, hey, hop in the car, let's go. And you don't ask, who are you, where are you going? You just hop in and you go, And if we lived our lives like that, we'd be dead in a long time. So you've got to be very careful. And it's good to have a good place to stay. And what you're doing when you're meditating is you're creating a stable state of becoming in the present moment so that the sort of impulse to go someplace else is not quite so strong. You've got a comfortable place to stay. You're not exposed in the sun and the rain and someone comes up with a car that looks like it'll offer shelter. You've got shelter already. So that when someone comes up and you say, well, you can quiz them first. Who are you? Where are you going? How are you going to guarantee you're going to bring me back? So you are creating a state of becoming in the concentration. And that, in addition to helping pry you away from other states of becoming, it's like a kind of a test case. So this is how becoming gets created. There's a desire. And then around the desire, there'll be the world that is relevant to that desire, either in the sense that it enables, it offers the opportunities for you to fulfill that desire, or it gets in the way. And then as for you, your identity is basically two things. One is the you who will benefit from fulfilling the desire, and then there's the you who has the capacity to bring that thing about. Your set of skills, your monetary resources, whatever. That's your identity in that particular becoming. Like if you decide you want to have a pizza after the talk tonight. Okay. Do you have the money? Yeah. Okay, you can get the pizza. Now the next question is, where out there in the world are pizzas available? And where's the best pizza? And you can talk about that. And what's getting in the way of my getting a pizza right now? I'm sitting here looking in this group and it looked kind of embarrassing. I just went out and ran and got a pizza. So I'm going to wait. So that's part of the relevant world. But there are lots of other aspects of you at that point that are not relevant. And other aspects of the world that are not relevant to that pizza desire. It's when you have lots of different conflicting desires. That's when you feel torn inside. And so that's one, you're trying to straighten things out as to what kind of desires you really do want to follow through. Because there are good desires and bad desires. One of the points I was planning to make tonight is that the Buddha does give a good role for desire in the path. It's just learning how to be more selective in which desires, because then that becomes the kind of person you will become in the world in which you're going to live. There was that great Far Side cartoon where there's a nuclear war is going on and people are running around crazy and bombs going off on the horizon, and this car is pulled to a stoplight and there's a dog in the window of the car, and there's another dog down on the sidewalk. And the caption was, finally something caught Fido's attention. So if you have dog type desires, it's the other dogs that are relevant, and the rest of the world is irrelevant at that point. That's becoming.
So many of the becoming things that happen in meditation for me are almost like worries.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting something to happen, or maybe it's the desires for security.
Yeah, the desire is there behind the worry, yeah.
Yeah, for security that ain't going to be.
Mm-hmm. So try to locate the desire and say, is this something I really want to follow through? That's how you start getting a handle on it. That's how you start getting a handle on it. And again, by doing the concentration and say, I'm going to create this state here. My body is going to be the world. I am going to be the meditator. I'm going to get together with the breath. That is a kind of becoming. And as you learn how to do that well, you begin to understand the process of becoming, so you can recognize it in other areas as well.
Still thinking about that. A dear family member of mine passed away a few weeks ago, and it was at an end of a long bout of cancer, and so he was very heavily sedated at the end, and he was not Buddhist and had no practice. But thinking about those doors and these things that are presented to you, I wonder about that sedated state, and if that's something, as a practitioner, do I ideally avoid?
Yeah, you want to be... You don't want to be overcome with pain, but at the same time you don't want to be so sedated you don't know what you're doing. Because otherwise you just go, when you're that way, you're just going to go for whatever appears. Something comes up, well, this is the opportunity, just go with it.
It's interesting to me because he did not want to die, and he was pretty adamant about that, and for about 6 hours, just before he died, he was trying to get up and walk around and do sit-ups and do exercises. He was so determined to exercise in a way or something. That state of resistance, I guess I'm just trying to figure out what to make of all of that. And maybe there's...
Okay, well, a lot of that comes when you believe that death is going to be annihilation. And you really want to resist that. But it sounds like in a case like that, he'd probably be determined, I'm going to get out of here. Yeah. And if there's an opportunity to go, he'll probably take it. Now, what the opportunities that were open to him, I have no idea. So. But in every case like that, when someone passes away, you say, okay, dedicate the merit of my practice. So that if they know about it, that they can, express their appreciation, and that appreciation becomes their merit.
Is there a statute of limitations on that?
Oh, no.
Can you say that again?
Well, it's, they talk about dedicating merit to other beings, and the merit goes to them only if they, one, know, and two, approve. No, devas know. Hungry ghosts can know. And this hungry ghost you want to help. There's someone once came to the Buddha one time and said, does the merit dedicated to my ancestors reach them? And he says, well, if they're hungry ghosts, yes. And he said, what if they're not hungry ghosts? And the Buddha said, don't worry, you have everybody has relatives who are hungry ghosts. Now, of course, in India, they counted relatives, to 7 generations, So it's quite a wide range there. But even then, they have to be the kind of hungry ghost who is willing to accept and approve. I've heard of some cases in Thailand. There was 2 cases that are relevant here. Well, actually 3. There was this one woman who, we were talking earlier about Voodoo, she liked to do white magic. And the whole thing about people who do magic is they believe that they've worked their way around karma. And she started seeing these hungry ghosts in her meditation, outside of her meditation. She'd be walking down the street and the hungry ghosts would be sort of huddled under stairways and little corners and things. And she didn't like it. So she asked my teacher how not to see these things. And he said, no, you can learn from it. Dedicate your practice to them. Ask them first why they're hungry ghosts. What do they do? And then say, okay, dedicate the merit to you. And so she did. And she found out these, the karmic things that these people had done that they'd just gotten fixated on at death, and that had taken them down. And in a lot of cases, she was able to get them out of that state by dedicating the merit to them. And in a few cases she couldn't, and then John Fung said, look, in that case their karma is still too strong. Your duty is to dedicate the merit, and then what they do with it is what they'll do with it. But it really did teach her a lot of good lessons about karma. And I think she needed those lessons. the other two stories about hungry ghosts that did not accept. One was a case, there was a old Christian cemetery in Bangkok which was removed one time, and they built a condominium there. And ask any Thai or any Singaporean or anybody in that part of the world, you live in a condominium over what was used to be a cemetery, there's going to be problems. No. And so sure enough, this man realized that there was this Catholic nun in his condo. And so he would dedicate the merit of his meditation to her, and she said, I don't want your Buddhist merit. And there was another one, this story, this is one of my favorites. When Ajaan Fuang first went to Bangkok to teach, he was in the second story of a two-story building which had two independent entrances. The first story had one entrance, second story had another one. And the monk living down in the first story was involved in the Buddha image black market. In fact, the international art market that has Buddha hands and Buddha heads that you see on people's tables probably went through him. Then people would bring in these things, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning. No questions were asked. Did you cut this off yourself? Where did you get this? He just would buy these things. And he managed to do it by having money in a drawer that he didn't touch, technically. And, you get the money out of the drawer, and then you take, you bring the image, you take the money out of the drawer. Well, he did this, and it was a very isolated corner of the monastery. He didn't like having anybody else around. And here was Ajaan Fuang moving in upstairs. Not only was he upstairs, but he was also a meditation monk who might be up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And so he did everything he could to get rid of Ajaan Fuang. And this went on for a couple of years. And silly things like, he'd be invited to a meal and he wouldn't let Ajaan Fuang know. And the list looked bad. He wouldn't show up for the invitation, that kind of stuff. Fortunately, the abbot, who was the supreme patriarch of Thailand, caught on to this. And so and what he did was, he said, okay, from now on, people are going to be eating meals with me when I'm invited out. I want to know the day before. And so the list was presented, and if Ajaan Fuang's name was on the list, he went and said, Fuang, you want to come and have a meal with me tomorrow? That kind of stuff. At any rate, Ajaan Fuang left after 3 years to start a monastery, the monastery where I stayed in Rayong. And soon after that, the guy was found stabbed to death in his room. Somebody probably saw that there was money in the drawer, and they just took it. And so a few years after that, then Ajaan Fuang was invited back to teach, back in the same place. And a number of people were meditating there, and independently, quite a few of them got the same vision, which was that there was this bloody monk still wandering around in the building. And in each case, Ajaan Fuang would say, okay, dedicate the merit of your meditation to him. So they'd sit for a few minutes, and he wouldn't take it. Some grudges don't end very easily. So, if you were on good terms with this dear relative, he probably will accept it.
So, as a practitioner, what door are we looking for if we go on to that?
Just make up your mind. Whichever door I can continue the practice. Because if you put too many qualifications on it, it may make it difficult. But that's the qualification you want to put on it.
So pick a Deva door or don't?
Well, I'd say take a Deva door, but watch out. There are Devas and Devas, There's one of a nice story in the canon is there's this one woman who provided food for 2 monks for many, many years. And then after all of them died, she found herself reborn in what's called the Dusita level, which was where sort of the more serious Devas go. And she checked around to see where the monks were. And they were down in the Gandharva level. Now the Gandharvas are the teenagers of the Deva world. They're into fast cars, sex, music. And so she went down, she gave them a piece of her mind. She said, look, I did not feed you all these years, so you should be just having a good time like this. And so one of the monks got embarrassed, and he goes off and meditates, and then goes up to a higher level. But there was another monk who was just not listening. So watch out for the Gandharvas.
It seems like rebirth is something that we always take on a human form. Is that?
Not necessarily. You can be reborn as anything. Devas, animals, hungry ghosts, hell beings. I mean, it's all possible.
But are we always in sort of some sort of physical realm?
Well, I mean, some of the Deva realms are what they call subtle physical realms, and then there's some formless realms where they don't have a clear body. There's just consciousness and feelings. There's a book downstairs called The Truth of Rebirth. You might want to check it.
I'm responsible for a young man who is testing his way with the truth. My son I never know whether he's telling the truth or not. He doesn't always know whether he's telling the truth or not. And, I've been on the 5 precepts for a long time, so it took me a while to get clear about the truth, but then I did, and now it rolls right off my tongue. But I just don't know how to teach it, especially to someone who's not particularly concerned.
Yeah. Well,
If you have some advice about
well, just try to point out that it's a lot easier when you tell the truth because you don't have to keep remembering what you told to whom.
Certainly, I get that.
And see, I don't know if you can get through to him on that one.
Well, there's, this sort of interest in that not telling the truth makes things easier. This is easier. The story that I'm telling right now is that the easiest way to connect in this situation is to keep going, keep moving. It doesn't look easy from the outside. I've seen that.
I mean, it sounds like he's going to have to run into some situations where he just learns he's made it much more difficult for himself. That way. Now, if you can help make it difficult for him, that would...
Let the message be big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That the drawbacks of lying to your mother are much bigger than you might think.
I can do that.
Another question. So I'm actually in school for nutrition right now, and so surrounding the idea of not killing, meat as a component of a healthy diet for certain people, or an understanding that I might be giving that advice to someone if they need it, and thinking how that could be influencing, the production of meat, and it seems like a kind of conflicting.
Yeah, you've got, with the precepts, basically it's telling somebody like to kill. You're either doing the killing yourself, or telling someone specifically to kill. That's what the precept covers. That's as far as it goes. With the monks, for us, we take meat as long as we don't know that or suspect that it was actually killed for our sake. And so, as far as the precept is concerned, it's specifically on what you do to tell people, say to kill, or where you do the actual killing yourself. And so that telling the person to take meat would not be breaking the precept.
And then getting involved, but any involvement in the killing of that meat would be then?
Well, there's some karma there, but you can dedicate the merit of your meditation to other beings. Because as a monk, I found that oftentimes, the gifts that you just can't really not, refuse, are gifts like this. Specifically in Thailand, if a very poor family they give a little bit of sausage or a bit of fish or something. I mean, you can't say no. So in that case, we got to dedicate the merit to the beings. And it's this kind of reflection that makes you realize that it would be good to get out of this system entirely. This system where everybody's feeding off of everybody else. I mean, that's what the human-animal world is. You know, we're feeding off of one another all the time. And even if you're vegetarian, there's still going to be some dying that goes into the production of food, even if it's not animal food. You know, the pesticides and things that have to be applied. And so the only really pure place to be is just to get out entirely. Yes?
Following on that, when it's time for a beloved household pet who's at the end of life and at the veterinarians, how do you handle that as far as agreeing that euthanasia is the best for that animal?
I wouldn't agree. Because you don't know where the animal's going to go afterwards. They might actually be suffering more. And simply you don't see it. But maybe the sense that they would know they've been betrayed by their owner. That would hurt a lot. So I'd get the animal out of the vets and bring it home and care for it. We had a case in the monastery where this poor dog had lived down the hill from us. The owner used to like to shoot at the dog. We didn't know this. And the dog started taking refuge in the monastery and basically moved in with us. And we always thought that, she moved very slowly because she was old. And then one day someone ran over her leg. And so we took her down to the vet, and the vet did an x-ray and discovered that she had just shot full throughout her body. And so the vet wanted to put her down. I said, well, no, we'll take her back to the monastery and care for her. And the vet said, well, in that case, I'll keep her here overnight. And then next morning, said, oh, she died of kidney failure. The vet just went ahead and did the euthanasia anyhow. But we should have taken her back that evening.
So there is a realm beyond the devas then?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there is. Yeah. That's what nirvana is all about. You know?
Who was it who said if you have a choice to
Go to the Deva room. Ajaan Geoff, who was the founder of Wat Metta. Mm-hmm.
Can nirvana really be considered a realm?
It's not really a realm because it's not a state of becoming. And it's kind of outside of time and outside of space, but it is beyond the Deva realm. Mm-hmm.
Can a Deva come back as a human?
Oh, yeah. You've probably been a Deva many times. My teacher had a couple of students who he said, these people were Devas in their last lifetimes, and they were extremely difficult people. I mean, they were used to everything happening, just like that. And nothing in the human world ever really satisfied them. There's a question back.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about consciousness, like it's one of the khandas, and there's so many other sort of definitions for that kind of in the world, and sometimes I feel like I still get a little bit tripped up on the Buddha myth like that.
Okay, consciousness is basically the registering of sense data before you've interpreted it, before you've given it a name. The giving of the name was what the Buddha would call perception. But prior to that, and you have the basic, you see a gray door back there, and you have that sense, just the experience of the gray door. And then you've put the name, okay, that's a gray door back there, that's the perception. But that basic experience, that's the consciousness.
The moment of contact.
The moment of contact, yeah.
And you have to be aware to have them, or it could be below awareness.
A lot of it can be below awareness. I mean, these things, the contact is there all the time. There's some passages in the canon, though, that tend to indicate it's more what you pay attention to. That's where you're fully conscious of something, and then that can develop into the various other stages, where the perception comes in, and then the act of feeding on something, which is the clinging, comes on top of that, based on what you're paying attention to. But the bare registering is the consciousness. When the Buddha gives examples of the activities of the different aggregates, perception he illustrates with seeing blue, green, red, or perceiving blue, green, and red. And consciousness is being conscious of flavors. Now it sounds very similar, but you have to understand that sight is the more active of your senses, and taste is the more passive. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to touch something to see it. Something has to come and touch you for you to taste it. So consciousness is the more passive side of just registering the sense data. Yes.
Can you elaborate on what the Buddha meant by why the mind is on fire, and how, in the process of it becoming unbound?
Okay, the way they understood fire in those days was that there was this fire element in everything, and that it would be, if it was aggravated, you'd actually get a fire to come out. And that's how they explained when you were making a fire, say rubbing two sticks together, and it was aggravating the fire element, and the flame would come up. And in order for the flame to continue burning, it required fuel. Now the word for fuel is, guess what? The same word as the word for clinging. Upadana. And the idea being that the fire is actually feeding on this and clinging at the same time. Because the word upadana also means to feed. Like a tree would feed off the soil. And then that the fire feeds off the fuel. And in the process of feeding off it, it will cling. And then and when it clings, then it's trapped in the fuel. You take a stick with it's flaming at the end, and you try to shake the fire off. It won't shake off. It's clinging. It's holding on. And so it's when the fire actually lets go, it gets freed by its own act of letting go. The fuel doesn't trap the fire. The fire is trapping itself by holding on to the fuel. It's like that analogy they give of the coconut trap for monkeys. You put a little fruit inside a coconut with a little hole just big enough for it to slip its hand through. And it grabs onto the fruit, and now it can't slip its hand back out. It's trapped by the fact that it's holding on. So when the Buddha is talking about your mind being on fire, you're holding on to things and they're trapping you. Or you've trapped yourself by holding on. And so it's learning how to let go and stop feeding off of those things. That's when you can get out. Because when they talk about the fire going out, they didn't say it wasn't so much the fire goes out of existence, it just returns to a state of being calm, released. And those are kind of the implications for them of what this analogy was.
So unbinding is not the fire extinguishing, but just
the fire letting go. Letting go, right. Yeah. Well, there's differences, and with fire, of course, it can always be made to burn again. But when the mind lets go, that nirvana does not happen again. It can't be provoked. It's not like this is where the analogy breaks down. Yes.
I'm finishing up the book, Why Buddhism is True.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you had a chance to look at that, because I'm going to read the writing about it.
I haven't. I've read about the book. I haven't read the book itself. Is it true that he says, we basically have these cravings because of our genetic makeup?
Yes.
Okay, that's taking the responsibility off of us. From the Buddhist point of view, we're responsible for our cravings. We can't blame them on our genes.
He gets a little bit more in depth.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would agree with that statement.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, otherwise I haven't read it.
I keep thinking, what would Ajaan say about
I'm very skeptical when when science says it's proved Buddhism. Because there are a lot of things that science, one, can't prove. And then two, a lot of stuff that passes for Buddhism in the scientific literature is very, very strange.
Along those same lines, what do you think about sort of the modern mindfulness movement for like chronic back pain folks and people with depression? And is there anything bad about teaching kind of watered down mindfulness?
Could you call it something else? Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't have that power.
No, that's the problem, because what they're teaching is basically equanimity.
Yeah.
Don't react, which is not what mindfulness is. I mean, mindfulness was such a good word for what the Buddha was teaching, i.e., be mindful of something, i.e., keep it in mind. It's a faculty of the memory, and then for the Buddha, these are the things that you keep in mind for the sake of the practice. Whereas just basically learning how to be with something and not react. You're learning patience, you're learning equanimity, which are things that Westerners lack an awful lot. I don't know, did you ever listen to the tapes they had of the Ajaan Geoff students reminiscing about Ajaan Geoff down in Portola Valley years back? And I was struck by how again and again and again the lessons that Ajaan Geoff was forced to teach the Westerners were basically lessons in patience and lessons in equanimity. Because this was something we were lacking. I mean, this is something you teach 5-year-olds in Thailand. These Westerners come, and they don't, they get upset because it's hot outside, And Ajaan Geoff says, "What do you expect?" But it's and I think a lot of what's passes for mindfulness is basically that: teaching people patience, people teaching equanimity, how to be with something and not get worked up about it, which is perfectly fine. But then all this other stuff gets pulled in.
It's definitely not like premium quality Dharma that's necessarily being taught in these courses. I mean, it's
no.
Still, if you look at the literature, it still benefits patients with chronic pain, and it's not, they're probably not going to become Buddhist meditators.
No, I mean, it's perfectly okay that they're being taught this. The question is, there have been more studies now that have come out and say, a lot of the early mindfulness research is totally bogus, and all of a sudden this is going to be affecting us. The mindfulness doesn't work, That's what I'm afraid of. That, or someday they're going to copyright mindfulness and say, okay, Buddhist monks can't teach this anymore because our mindfulness is scientific. Buddhist monks, they mix up rebirth and karma and all this other stuff.
It'd be quite a development.
Yeah.
Ajaan, if you want to get a break before the...
Yeah, you'll be chanting at 7?
Yes.
And then how long does that usually last?
Very short.
Okay, we'll take a short break and then you can take this out and we'll come back.